I am so passionate about the disassociation that seems to occur so often with humans and animals.
At least it helps you to create an environment that you're like, we're starting from a really good place.
This episode is kindly sponsored by Premier Performance Calming Cookies and Westgate Labs. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of This Equestrian Life. How are you, Rhi?
Wednesday!
I feel like I get such bad vibes when we manage to talk over each other within the first 5 seconds.
We're just excited to be here.
We're so excited to be here. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Hope you're all having a great week. Thank you for choosing to spend some time with us. We feel so honoured. Rhi, how's your week been?
It's been really fun. A few things have happened. Oh gosh, don't know where to begin. Might have to. First thing, sustainability follow-up. We did have some listeners who reached out and use electric vehicles for towing, so wanted to speak to those. So there was one person who tows a mare and foal IFA trailer with their electric Tesla. They said, we don't travel great distances, but it does the short journeys fine. We only have a 13.2 pony. We've also seen a BMW 4x4 electric towing a double trailer at a recent show. And then somebody else who said that they tow with a BMW 2 Series Active Tourer. It can only take up to 1,400 kilograms, but they've downsized to a single trailer. So wanted to close the loop. How very corporate of us. Close the loop on that with the electric vehicals. Because I thought
that's really interesting. Yeah, that is really interesting. Yeah. And I think it's just a case of, we're not saying, in last week's episode, we weren't saying like you have to do all of these things. And it's more like, how can we be better? And I think it's interesting to hear that people are starting to do things like that, and these cars are starting to be more stronger and more able to, because you think the first electric cars were pretty rubbish, weren't they? They were kind of like go-karts, and now they're much more like normal cars. I think it's important to mention as well, like electric cars have been, a big thing for in the cities. They make a big difference, don't they, when you're doing short journeys and that kind of thing. My parents have an electric car actually, and it took some getting used to, and I think that's like with most things, isn't it? Like they do like it now, but for long journeys it is still very inconvenient because we're not totally set up for electric. And I don't know, you read about the batteries and that kind of thing, and you wonder whether that will be the most sustainable thing going forward, is electric cars. But it's interesting that people are making that shift. It'd be great to hear if there are some horse boxes that go that way.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I'm just thinking, have you also ever just been like riding along on a hack and then suddenly you kind of look behind you and you were like, Tesla!
Literally,
they're so quiet. But yes, the jump scare of Teslas.
Yes, silent cars creeping up on you, yeah. And then you're suddenly like, oh, sorry. Or you're walking maybe to abreast on a very quiet road, and then suddenly there's a car there and you're like, oh, sorry. I didn't mean to be in your way. You crept up on me.
Yeah. I was hacking this week, actually, and Harley was being quite spooky. And so I started just singing because I was like, screw it, I'm going to sing.
Give us a rendition.
And I was singing.
Give us a rendition.
No, it's on my Instagram. I'm not doing it again. Goodness me. Enough people have seen it already.
There you are, thinking you're just talking to a very small audience.
Yep.
No.
Yep. I was belting it out, and I just kind of turned because Harley kind of did this thing that made me think there was something behind us. 2 cyclists hadn't said a word, and I was like, oh, hello.
Stealth cyclists, honestly, they're the worst. They creep up on you, and then your horse has a little whoop when they go past, and they're like, oh goodness, he's very jumpy. And I think, I didn't know you were there, nor did he. Goodness me. Honestly, people are a nightmare.
It was. Yeah, they really are. So, second thing I did this week that I wanted to tell you is a colour analysis.
This is going to be great for a podcast, isn't it, Rhi, when you just show us this? We're going to make sure this clip ends up on Instagram. Carry on, go for it. I'm very interested in this, selfishly.
I did actually do some videos, so I'll put them on my Instagram, but I'm showing Miri this like colour wheel. Like when you go to a paint store and you have paint samples, it kind of looks like that, and it's got all the different shades. And so she does it through seasons. Some people do tonal ones. And the idea of a colour analysis is that you sit down and you have these drapes put over your neck, and they're all different shades. So there's like autumn, winter, summer, spring, cool colours, warm colours, and then you sort of see how they affect your skin, so you can wear the best colours for you.
And they'll want, like, some will make you look washed out, some will make you look like glowing, that kind of thing.
And it's wild. Like, I've loved this stuff for like years. I always did the paper tests and stuff when I was younger, and I've always been really curious. But it is amazing how when you it's like if you put paper against your skin, does your skin appear, or do your veins appear green or blue, or basically an early version of colour analysis, so that you can figure out whether you're better in silver or gold and what your undertone is. So I've always been interested in this stuff, and yeah, it was really, really interesting to see what a stark contrast, because I thought it would be quite difficult to tell sometimes. Like I'd be like, oh, you know, is there much of a difference? Yes. Some of these made me look like I'd been in hospital for like 3 months.
Dragged out of the grave by your toenails.
Yeah, like purple. Anyway, it was really interesting. So I'll put a thing on my Instagram. So that was fun.
Come on, I'm going to take a guess. I think you are warm autumnal.
Oh my gosh, so close. I'm warm spring. Which actually, there's some colours that I've like...
Colour analyst.
You should. That could have been your other career. There's some like really bright... So I'm showing Miri, there's a very bright green. What kind of green would you call that? Don't know.
It's a bit lurid.
Lurid? That sounds horrible.
Yeah, it's quite a bright green. It was quite a bright green.
Lurid? All right.
No, I just mean it. God, here we go. Fight.
And there's this... there's a very, very bright purple. That's one of my colours that makes me look banging. Again, with the words. Yeah, it's like... She said it's one of my power colours, which I thought was a fantastic word.
Yeah. So when you're going to go and do like a big pitch at work or something, you would wear your purple Power Ranger suit.
I do have a very big... Yeah, well, literally. And yellow. Buttercup yellow. So one of these... The middle one looked amazing.
Oh, yeah. Like in... How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, and she wears that beautiful yellow silk dress.
Yes! Although that's technically cool.
Oh, is it?
Yes. I think so.
I always wanted a bright yellow dress when I've got a tan. My tan is never a tan, is it? It's always like tanned arms, patchy, tanned chest, patchy, because horse riding. Can't horse ride with a bikini on. Some people do. I don't. I think it's weird. Anyway.
Maybe you'd get more views on your Instagram if you did, Miri.
No, because I am part of the Itty Bitty Titty Committee and I absolutely wouldn't. People would be like, who's that boy on a horse?
It's taking a turn. How was your week, Miri?
A wild turn. My week was good. I wanted to give you an update on that Giganta horse that I've got in for training because she's so wonderful and she's making so much nice progress and I'm so proud of her. I can now lunge her. Her name's Duchess.
Oh my gosh, what a great name.
Yeah, great name. Everybody that comes on the yard, they're like, oh my God, isn't she wonderful? Because she is so different. I must put a picture of her. I must put a picture of her up on my Instagram so that you can see, because she's so big. Like, she's like arm span wide across her chest, but she can now walk and trot on the lunge. She can be led down to the arena. She can do the very basic groundwork patterns. She's started to learn a little bit about the tool work, which is like where we use a flag on a stick as like a metaphor for the human environment. Kind of complicated. If you would like to learn more, please head over to my Patreon. But she's just great, and she's really coming out of her shell, and she's much more confident, and she's much more like she's starting to kind of behave as her size would make her behave, you know, like a bit more confident. And I was thinking about it before because she's got this big exterior and she uses herself in this big way, but the reality is she's just like a mouse in a rhino's body. And I think if there's an illustrator out there or someone who's good at writing a story, maybe I should write it myself and I'd get an illustrator to make it, but I think it would make a really good children's book because she's like this big horse, but actually the reality is she's very small on the inside and she's very sensitive, and the reason that she runs away from things and uses her big size is because actually she's really scared and nervous. And yeah, I think it's always interesting. These horses get such a hard kind of reputation, yeah, because they're big and they're strong, so they're difficult. But she's actually just nervous.
I think we're all a little bit Duchess. Yeah, I want a weekly update now. She could be a mini segment. Okay. Yeah, mini segment. I think I'm in love with her. Duchess? I'll send you some videos. Yeah, please. She's lovely. And then what else have I got up to this week? We've had a really busy week. We've got loads of horses in for training. The weather has been every season in a week. It's 14 degrees today. It was like 2 degrees the other day. It rained so much yesterday. My pants got wet when I was riding, and the sky was a very boring shade of grey. I was thinking of because there's quite a lot of listeners who listen to this podcast first thing on a Wednesday morning, and like they tag us on Instagram and they've got fabulous pictures from behind the horse's ears and things. So I was thinking of them today, thinking I hope it's that really warm weather, because it's been lovely this week, and it just makes all the difference, doesn't it?
It's been we've had lots of different kinds of weather. The yard's on a hill, so we get like the extremes. So we get like really windy, really cold, whatever it might be. But yeah, no, it's been a good week. Busy but good. Shall we explain a little bit about what we're going to talk about today? You'll have seen in the title, but after the grand success of the buying and selling horses episode, we wanted to kind of touch on a few other points on that, but also talk about, well, go on, you explain it. What are we going to talk about today, Rhi?
Well, yeah, I think we kind of it was very popular, and I think that's because it was such a relatable thing. Like, lots of us have bought horses or want to buy, but we sort of felt like, okay, it's all great, you get the horse home, but then what? And actually, there's so much more to it than just buying the horse. And that first year with the horse in particular, a lot can happen. There's a lot to think about, a lot that you can set up in a really good way, and it's so exciting, especially with a younger horse, which actually we won't go into too much today because we're doing another episode on that, spoiler. But yeah, I think we just felt like we had some really interesting things to say about the first month and the first year with a new horse, and that's sort of where we wanted to begin.
I think the first thing that comes up for me was something that I wanted to talk about with the last episode, was responsibility. And I think that's something that is sometimes, I think there can be a bit of a, it may not be always, but a bit of a throwaway culture with horses sometimes. This kind of, can't make the horse do what I want it to do, I'm going to sell them. Or the horse no longer serves the purpose that I wanted them to serve. And this maybe sounds a bit like brash way of saying it, but I think the rudimental side of it is that black and white. Like, the horses too, you know, seeing old horses advertised and stuff, I think I find that very difficult. And I think, like I said before, I don't sell horses anymore, and maybe I'm in a lucky position to do so, but I know that you will align with me on this, Rhi, because I know that you would feel like if you had a horse, like if, for example, Woody was still here and he couldn't be ridden, but he could still have been just in the field living, you would have given anything for that. And I think the thing that I kind of want to start with is that responsibility that we take when we own an animal. And obviously sometimes very difficult situations occur for people, and they can no longer financially support that animal, and they have to do the best that they possibly can. And actually, I had a very interesting conversation with somebody who is in that sort of a position, and maybe we'll touch on that, because there are things that you can now do, like the Blue Cross, for example, and I don't know whether maybe Red Wings offer a similar service that I know you work with them, but they will help you rehome a horse through them. So if people do fall onto a very, very difficult times and they do need to find another option, and the horse is maybe not a saleable, meaning that they have they would be easy to sell, or you're not trying to kind of, they still have they can have a great time being a ridden horse or whatever it might be. The Blue Cross will support people in doing that. So they'll help the people sell them, not sell them, but help people rehome them. And there's a process that you go through. So anyway, responsibility, I think, is the first thing. And then that takes us on to kind of what we can do to be responsible in that first starting point. Like, how do we take responsibility for that new horse? Is that kind of a good segue?
Yes. Well, on the responsibility front, there's two things that I've done personally, and I've seen more people do it. The first is I have an email and a document actually that my partner has, my parents have, and my yard owner has, and it has really detailed instructions for my horse should I no longer be here or no longer be in a position to make sound decisions. And I've since realised that actually there are more complicated legalities to having an estate or passing money on, which I now need to figure out because I've seen that thanks to a Facebook group. But this really details what I want for my horse, that I want my coach involved in the sale, that he's not to move from livery while he's being sold, that if he's in a position not to be sold because he can't be a ridden horse, that this is to happen, It's quite detailed actually. And the other thing that I do, because I just think I wouldn't, firstly, my horses are everything, and I would try very, very hard never to sell my horse, especially Harley and Woody. I would never have sold either, and in fact I didn't, so, that's that. But I also would never want my partner to be in a position where they have to make a decision for me on top of the grief of losing someone and knowing how important the animal was to them.
Yeah.
So there's that. And the other thing, and I know not everyone can do this, but I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I contribute monthly to what I call Harley's pension pot. And I had the same thing for Woody, and it came apparent because when I was rehabbing Woody, it was over a period of a year, and at one point in that moment, it became clear that we weren't gonna be able to rehab him as a ridden horse, and that was always a possibility. So I started to contribute to a savings account that I called his pension fund, that was designed to be his retirement livery and just get me ahead of it a bit. And then, of course, we weren't able to retire him in the end, and I ended up with this money that and actually ended up helping to pay for Harley, which was a lovely cyclical thing. But I think being able to contribute a little bit, even if it's a little bit each month, it's just helpful to know it's there. And I like knowing that he's got a pension fund for his retirement, I've got one for mine. And you know, if they never make it there, then that money maybe goes to something else. But I think it's a really lovely thing to do, and it helps me keep my promise to myself that I hope I'd never have to sell him, you know?
You are the most financially savvy person I've ever met.
I don't know how high your bar is, but
Pretty low because this sounds lovely, and I think it's a wonderful thing, and I think it's complicated if you have lots of horses like myself.
Yes.
And maybe I live a little bit bury my head in the sand and hope that never happens kind of circumstance. But it does make me think about it because, you know, having difficult horses like Blondie, for example, or Belle, who I want to talk about today, who was actually given to me, so she's a slightly different circumstance from buying a horse. Like, what would Blondie do? I have actually spoken to a friend who would have her. I know that she would, but even then, it's still not actually written down. You know, would George know who to contact as my fiance? Would he know what to do? Like, I think, having some backup plan, even just in terms of, you know, if you were unwell, what would the yard owner do? That kind of thing. Like, I think that's an important thing to definitely think about. Right. That was very serious.
That was the end piece. The beginning is something else.
The beginning piece is very exciting, isn't it? You buy a new horse and you think, I've got this giant pet, essentially. What am I going to do with this pet? We touched on it in the last episode when we spoke about buying horses, and that sort of not wanting to, like, give them some grace when they first arrive. Don't get on the next day and expect them to be okay. Don't get on them the next day and then go to a show. You know, give them sort of like a cooling off period as such, but without completely going cold turkey and then getting on 2 weeks later and wondering why they bucked you off, kind of thing. Yeah. So that first month, I think, are there any things that you would do, and then maybe I'll do the things that I would suggest to someone if you haven't said anything that I think we should be talking about in that first month that is vital as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, letting them settle in for a few days, but not leaving them so they go completely feral, like starting some easy work. I try and keep things the same. So if they had a certain feed
important.
Yeah, like if they were, like Harley, for example, if he was going out overnight, I kept that the same, and actually we've just kept him that way. His feed, we kept the same. And I also do something that I coin the Equine MOT, which if you're listening in the US, an MOT is our yearly car service where we get our car checked over, like top to bottom, basically.
What does it stand for? Motor something test.
Oh, Ministry of Transport. Is that right?
Boy.
Yeah, that is boring. Anyway.
So MOT is actually a really unsuitable word for this, but there we are. A general service.
A service.
Service.
Yeah, so I did this with Woody. I did it with Harley too, where in their first week first couple of weeks, they had the dentist, the physio. I had the saddler out. For Harley, I ended up getting a bespoke bridle fitter. On
the dentist front, that is regardless of whether the previous people have told you they've seen the dentist. And this is, we'll talk about this a bit more, but having somebody you trust, or your yard manager, or you are recommended to you trusts to do that check, because I get horses in for training all the time. Seen the dentist, and I have a clause in my contract that states that I reserve the right to have that horse's teeth checked by somebody I trust, because did you know some vets only do 4 hours worth of dentistry training in the 7 years that they take on their degree, and that's a known fact. I'm not making it up. I'm not shit stirring. That is actually true. And so if they said, oh yes, the vet did them a month ago, that's not good enough for me. I want somebody who is a specialist, qualified, really recommended, highly thing to do that check. So we mean even if they have already seen a dentist, please just do your due diligence. Often these professionals, if you know them and they're coming to the yard maybe for another horse, or you've said you've just bought a new horse and you want to check, they might not charge you the full price, they might not charge you at all. They'll be very happy to help because they would prefer a happy, comfortable horse than not.
Exactly.
Please continue.
We're same with like the farrier as well, or the podiatrist, depending on who you use. But just you're setting yourself up safely so that you know that this horse is comfortable, happy, able to do the things hopefully that you're asking. But also you're then setting them up for success, so that if in the first few weeks they feel a little bit fresh or a little bit sharp or something happens, you're not thinking, oh my goodness, is it pain, is it this, is it that, which it all could be. I mean, this isn't like it's a golden ticket, but at least it helps you to create an environment that you're like, we're starting from a really good place.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I always encourage, so I offer a consultation service through my website, plug, and the way that I often speak to people is, what I try and do is we get to a point where we have ticked off as many things as we can to be potentially pushing the horse's limit a bit higher. So like, for example,
so back up one step. Why would people come when would the consultation happen? What would be is it before they've bought a horse or when they've got a problem, or?
Well, generally it's when people run into trouble. So, but the way we can operate with our horses in this way, so it's like a kind of a system that you'd follow where you would check things off the list. So you would go through the horse's diet, and we would go through the horse's diet, and we'd look through the horse's diet, and we'd say, could be X causing this problem. Let's say the horse is really spooky and reactive. Okay. And this was the conversation actually I had with somebody the other day. The horse is very spooky and reactive. So we went through the whole diet. They're feeding haylage instead of hay. And I said, I would knock out the haylage. It's got a higher acid content. It can cause the horse to be more acidic in their hind gut. And that can really upset some horses. So that was one thing that I suggested. And it's this process, this protocol that we follow where we're like, could it be the dentistry? Could that be part of it? Probably not. Well, let's tick that one off. They saw the dentist, Could it be the saddle? When was the saddle last checked? Could it be the diet? Was that last checked? So when you're purchasing, turnout, management, some days this horse was turned out at X time and some days it was turned out at Y time. And the horse was really struggling with that routine. And I came along and I said, I think this is a big part of, I just shone some light on it and said, I think the management might be a really big part of why you're struggling. So what we can do is have a bit of a list of things to go through and be like, has this horse's saddle been checked recently when you're purchasing the new horse? Are the teeth good? Is the diet good? Is the management going to be, what's going to suit this horse's management? And then what you're doing is you're reducing the number of things that could possibly cause a problem. And that's what we're talking about, this servicing, kind of getting everything so that our ducks are in a row.
The other thing I think that's helpful to be aware of early on, because I had it with Harley, is understanding who was riding them before and how do they ride. And hopefully you have some videos, because so Harley arrives, and picture this, he's 5 years old, he's like quite up, he had quite like almost like an advanced looking frame, but a lot of it was sort of quite tense because he's young and whatever. And I remember in one of my first lessons with my coach, so I have a lesson once a week with my coach, always have, but when Harley first arrived, she was also riding him once a week. So I'm in one of my first lessons and I asked for canter, and he does this weird thing where he kind of like, I don't remember what he did, but it was a bit like, buggle. And I came back to trot and looked at my coach and I was like, what was that? And she was like, ask again. So I asked again, and he did this bubbly thing again. And I was like, do you think his saddle hurts? Like, do you think and I remember that we'd had the saddle looked at and it was all good. And she was like, she was like, how did Dan, who sold him to us, she was like, how did Dan ride? She was like, Dan rode him a lot in a light seat because he was doing a lot of like show jumping and that's how he rides. She was like, okay, let's try this. She was like, ask for canter, but I want you to stay in a light seat. Pops up to canter beautifully. So if I'd have been on my own, I think I'd have probably gone, oh my gosh, he's in pain, his back hurts, the saddle, da 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 da. But because I had someone who was like, let's look at the context of what this horse already knows and what they're used to and how you ride differently. Because at that time, I've worked hard on it, but I rode quite a lot with my seat. And so I would sit quite heavy for the transition. And Harley was just like, well, that's quite a lot, actually. Don't know if I can do that. And that, you know, it stops you going on a wild goose chase a little bit to be like, what does this horse already know?
Yeah, absolutely. Before we move on from our equine MOT, because I want to talk about, I think it'd be good to talk about professionals next, because you've touched on that already.
Yes.
Another thing, and thank you to the sponsor of this podcast for guiding us, giving us the opportunity to talk about this in a more in-depth way. I'm sat here wearing my Westgate gilet, actually. I didn't do this on purpose. I have been wearing it all day. But another thing that we hold responsibility for is our horse's parasite risk. Now, this might not be something that's very glamorous to talk about, because we are essentially talking about poo and worms. But I've worked with Westgate now. Gorgeous.
We're all about the glamour. Last week it was bins. This week it's poo. Sorry, I'm sorry. Carry on.
I have worked with Westgate now for a couple of years, and I know that you have similar protocol on your yard, Rhi, where you do worm egg counting. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, worm egg counting is where you take a poo sample or a saliva sample. There's two types, and you send it to a company such as Westgate Labs. And what they do is they test how many eggs, red worm or ascarid eggs, so they're two different types of worms, per gram of poo, right? Horses always have worms. They all do. At all times, all horses will have some volume of worm burden. Now, what we're looking for is for that worm burden to be low enough that it has no dramatic impact on that horse's body. Yeah. The problem being is that often yards have a blanket worming protocol where every horse gets wormed every 3 months, and that's just the rules, right?
Instead of doing
a worm egg count and then worming accordingly. The problem that we have is by doing it like that, we don't actually know if those wormers are effective. They will be effective in some cases, and they won't be being effective in other cases. And what that means is then it builds resistance to the chemicals, and we are at a really crucial point in the UK. I've been to a lot of talks with Westgate, and I have a lot of conversations with them about the importance of this, and this is why I am an ambassador for them. We are at a breaking point in the UK where if we continue to worm our horses in this blanketed way, we won't have any chemicals that work anymore, and there will be yards that have to close because horses will be dying of worm burden. And so, as one of those things that you can do for your horse when you first purchase them is understand what you need to be doing for them. I have a young horse who every single time we do a worm egg count, she has a small burden of red worm. And this is because when she was a foal, I dropped the ball and I didn't worm her accordingly when she was a young horse. That's Dee Dee, my 5-year-old. So she is always more susceptible. And the rule is that 80% of the worms live in 20% of the horses. So that means that you could be worming all of them and actually only 20% would need worming. And so that means that then all of that wormer is wasted going in the ground, being a bit like environmentally damaging essentially. But it means that then also the horses that do need it might not be getting exactly what they need, and there'll be a lot of horses that would be getting it and they didn't. I won't wax too lyrical about it, but we have got a discount code from Westgate, and it is a great time to be signing up to their subscription service where they will basically send you everything that you need. Throughout the year you would just get your worm egg counting packs every time you need them. You literally would just have to send them the poo. So that will be found in the show notes. I think I've said my piece on Westgate Labs. I hope that was okay, everybody. But a very important topic, and one I seem to have become very passionate about. Did you know, though, that my parents were both parasitologists?
No. I think I knew your dad were, because I knew your parents were scientists.
Well, my dad was an entomologist.
Oh.
Yeah, and my dad was an entomologist, so about insects and bugs and stuff. My mum's actually a malaria research scientist. When I told her that I was going to be partnering with Westgate, she was like, so proud.
Oh, that's cute. I really like that. But you are right. Like we have a worm egg count kind of protocol with our vets, and Harley's obviously been part of that. And it's only the most recent time that he's actually needed worming. The other times he's been completely fine. So it does show you that actually you don't really want to be giving them worming for no reason. But anyway, we've touched on that.
Yes, there we go.
Other
Worming,
professionals.
important. Yes, professionals.
That's-
So you obviously have your amazing coach. Can I call her by her name?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, you've got Hannah, and you talk about her all the time, and she's such a support network, and I think that's what I try to be for my clients on my yard, right? Not always. It's not like she's the only person that you train with, but you have somebody who you rely upon all the time for just, oh, what do you think about this? Oh, what do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm very lucky because I keep my horse on full livery with Hannah, and so she can see. I train with her once a week, and like I said, she occasionally rides Harley, and she rode him when he was younger, and it means that she can always have a 360 view on him and his care. And so, for example, there was a period of time in his 5-year-old year where I was struggling a bit with him out hacking. He was getting quite anxious, and some of the behaviour was getting quite big. And I remember came back to her one day, and I was like, I'm really struggling with this now. I thought I could work through it, but I'm struggling. Big behaviour, and so I was like, could you have a sit on him and just see what you're feeling? And so she did. She rode him for 3 days, and then we also had a conversation where she was like, okay, let's look at the management, let's look at what he's eating, let's look at his turnout, let's look at the exercise, let's look at the farriery, the physio, like all these things. And ultimately it was quite a simple thing actually. It was just that he hadn't been getting loads of work, and he was just like starting to feel quite strong. And then the anxiety thing was something else that is a longer term thing, but actually having someone who has all of those people connected is really helpful. And actually quite often our professionals will connect with one another on our horses when there is something that crops up, and I think that's a really powerful thing actually, to be able to say to your physio and your vet to speak to one another, or you know, the farrier and the physio, or whatever it is. It's really quite a helpful thing to be able to do that.
Definitely. And if ever you spoke to one of them and they said, no, I'm not talking to your vet, that is a massive red flag.
Yeah.
I have heard that a few times, that the farrier potentially or somebody just refuses to have communication with the vet, and I think no, that wouldn't be somebody I would continue to work with, because I think that there is no space within horses for arrogance or ego, and we all have to be humble, and we all have to be able to be like, oh god, yeah, okay, that needs to be better, or that needs to be different. And I think an important thing to touch on here is finding somebody who you trust implicitly early on is really important. And that's, I think, where my online stuff comes in, because sometimes people don't feel they have that, and there are lots of coaches now that will help online. So if you have somebody that you really respect, or you really trust, then reaching out to them and asking their opinion on things can, if you know, and pay them for the service, don't expect it for free, but finding somebody who you can do that with is really important. And I think finding these professionals can be difficult, right? You're moving to a new place, you're moving to a new area, potentially you're moving first horse, who knows, it could be your first time doing these things. A really good way, I think, and Ryu, hopefully, I don't know if you'll agree or not, but often areas have groups, Facebook groups.
Yeah.
And you'll be like Hertfordshire Horse Riders, for example. It would be very easy for me to go on there and say, please may people send me some suggestions for a physio or an osteo or a farrier, whatever it might be. You make your list of people, and then you ring people up and you have a conversation with them and you ask some questions. Or you go to your coach and you say, I'd like to find my horse a physio. Do you agree with this suggestion? This person came very highly recommended, whatever it might be, because actually real-time experience is super important. And if, you know, sometimes you may be recommended a saddler, for example, I'm just picking a profession, by somebody on the yard, you have to look at their scope of experience to work out whether that will be a recommendation that you would take.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is like ending relationships with professionals. I think that can feel quite difficult, especially if we all know that loyalty is important and the best professionals are hard to find. And I think it's also okay to listen to your gut. There's two things to touch on here. One is like there may come a point where you're working with a professional, you don't feel like you're getting what you need anymore. Maybe something's changed for you and your horse, and like it's okay to end that relationship. And I hope you will feel the confidence that you can do that. The other thing is, in my local area recently, actually, there was a professional who'd been working with people locally, and something really shocking and awful came out in the press about them, and I think a lot of people had no idea and they were very upset. And moments like that as well, I think it can be very difficult to think, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I worked with this person and this thing happened and I didn't know. And I think, you know, you only know what you know, and I think if you're ever unsure about somebody, you can always cut that off. And I think especially when you're getting to know people, like not leaving your horse alone with anybody, making sure that you're there. And if you get a gut feeling that you don't like the way something's being done or something's happening, it is your horse. They might be the professional, but that horse is your responsibility. You have a responsibility to that horse for, you know, making them comfortable. So, and I'm not saying that this was the owner's fault, by the way, it wasn't.
No.
Absolutely not. But it's okay to be like, actually, I'm going to try something different.
Yeah, and that is on, we touched on this before a little bit about that kind of loneliness thing. Like, it's okay to change your mind, and the way you do things will evolve. Hopefully it should. You know, life is about evolution, life is about growth, and having a growth mindset. And if you come up against something, I have a lot of conversations with people that about things not aligning anymore. You know, I used to work with this coach, but then they started suggesting this, the X, Y, or Z, and I didn't really like that. Like, they wanted me to ride my horse in draw reins or with some force, or they said I'll just wear spurs or whatever it might be, and it didn't sit right. And it's having that confidence to say, thank you so much for the time that we've spent together, but this no longer aligns for me. And we have to be able to do that for our horses. And I know how uncomfortable that can be. Like, that is a really difficult thing. But we are behind you, Rhi and I. We are there in solidarity. Your little girl group chat.
Yes.
And you know, and if ever you're struggling, then chat to some people around you and say, oh, when I was working with blah 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 person, I really didn't feel like it was going the right way, and then they suggested this, like, what do you think? And just be open and talk about it, because that can be a really helpful way of kind of giving you some confidence, some backup to be like, no, I am making the right decision because it does feel right for my horse. And yeah, like Rhi says, your gut is a very good instigator of shift like that.
Yeah agreed. So that's kind of the professionals, and then I guess the other piece is around you and your own horse's relationship and what that looks like in the first year. So I guess, Miri, do you want to touch on expectations and intentions first, or do we want to touch on the seasons?
Yeah, so I think expectations and intentions comes around like goal setting. So sometimes we'll buy a horse and we'll, with the intention of at some point going show jumping. Okay, and we'll think to ourselves, that is my bigger goal, my bigger thing. But what we have to do is look at what they're offering rather than what our expectation or our intention is, because it might be that they move and then they've actually find moving very difficult and the integration is very hard and they struggle with you know, finding friends or settling in. And so if our expectation is a hard line of I am going to be going show jumping within a month, you might find that actually that is really unsuccessful because what the horse is offering is much less than that. So I think it's important to understand, you know, have some things to be working towards. And this is why like goal setting is a kind of a complicated thing with horses, because it's not like riding a bike on a race on a bike.
It's not just you.
No, it's not just you. Exactly. There is another being to be considered. And when we consider them as their own self, we then start to get to a point where we can really peacefully get to the place we want to get to with them. You know, and your expectations may have to change. Your intentions may have to change. And all of the things that we've discussed, the MOT, the professionals, they're going to help guide you to that point. But it's being flexible that is so important. And making sure that we keep checking in with what that horse is offering and being so aware of that horse. And this is something that I have grown to acknowledge as much as I possibly can, but being aware of our horse, like looking at them, stopping your day and just looking at their body and thinking, oh, they're standing a little bit more upright in their chest. Like Harley, when he first arrived, he's really up and tight in the neck and a bit dipped in his back. Okay, I want to work on him being softer in that place in his body, so that then he can use his whole body, which is obviously all of what you guys have been doing. So it's like, what can I see? And do that regularly. Take some pictures of your horse, just stood, look at them, notice things, lunge them loose in just a head collar every now and then, so you can see how their body is moving, see where they naturally go to bend their body. This is the thing that's going to help you shape your goals and help you shape your progress, because then you're really looking at what is actually happening, rather than like closing your eyes, putting your blinkers on and going, right, we're going to go to a show in a month. That isn't necessarily going to get you where you want to get to.
Yeah, it's a funny balance, isn't it? I think I was very lucky with Harley because I already had some points of reference from other people and my coach that were really relaxed. So they were like, I didn't jump my horse for the first 6 months, or all we did was this and this. And therefore, in my head, the first year was just, and she was like, it takes a whole year to get to know a horse because of the seasons, etc., which we'll get onto. But so for me, I already had this idea of like, well, the first year is just going to be the first year. And the first 3 months, we really wanted him to learn to stretch because he didn't really know how to do that. And that was the foundation for everything else. And I actually have a video on my YouTube channel about going from poles to jumping Harley and the progression of that, because it took a really long time because of my timeline. So that was really interesting. But also I think it's having goals but allowing them to be fluid. And what I mean by that is, last year when I got comfortable with Harley, I was I think I might want to start doing some BD quests. And I had 2 outings in a row that were just like a bit they were a bit don't know, Harley felt a bit overwhelmed, and it was fine. Like, it always ended on a good note and everything, but I was like, well, this is great feedback. And that's how my coach had presented it to me. She was like, go see how you get on. If you have feedback that like he's not comfortable or it's not quite working for him, great, we know where the gaps are and we can come back and we can work on those gaps. And that's how I feel this year. I'm in my 2nd year now. My friend was like, you're going to go eventing, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. I was like, well, I'd really like to go cross country in the spring, and then depending on how that goes, we'll see. And there's another goal in my head that I will say it, actually. It's a big goal, so we'll see. But the British Dressage, they do this thing called the Associated Championships, and they do them for breeds.
I think you might have one. It's really nearby to me. Is it very far?
It's Onley.
Miles away. No,
miles. Sorry. And they have they have an Associated Championships for Irish drafts, or drafts, I think is the collective, because they've got like Cleveland Bays in it and stuff. And you can do it at intro, which feels very manageable. And you have to just get 3 scores above 60%, which I think is very doable for us. And so that's my like miniature goal. But I'm doing little things like going out schooling and little competitions. But I'm also like, if one of those things gives us feedback that we're not there, like, we just fluid, and that goal changes, and that's okay.
I just want to say how rare you are.
What do you mean?
In a wonderful way. Like, this is rare. You're rare. And I think that's why you are such a guiding light when it comes to horse ownership, because you haven't had horses all your life. You have had them in your life, but you haven't had like one horse. The volume of cherishing, I don't think that's English, but the amount that you cherish that relationship and that partnership and that progression is just so enviable. And I think people can learn so much from you, and I think that's wonderful. Like,
stop, you're gonna make me cry. Always crying. Mary's always bloody joking that I cry all the time,
but
I do, to be fair.
I just think it's magical, and I hope that people can hear the way you say things and take heed of it, because if we all cared for our horses and cared for their progression and their confidence cup that you've spoken about, then the world would be a very different place, because human desire just wouldn't come into it. Like, you have your goals, but they're so for both of you. They're not like, I want to do this, and I think that comes into horses a lot. The top of the sport is tricky and a complicated place, and this is a bit of a controversial thing to say, but the top of the sport isn't something that I particularly enjoy viewing anymore.
Yeah. We do have an episode planned actually to talk about competitions and, going out to competitions, but also particularly with you, Miri. I mean, I don't want to spoil it now, but your opinion on competition has changed, and I think we will get into that in an in-depth thing.
But I think it ties into what we're talking about, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like that sort of, like, why do we compete? Why do I compete now? And I think it's okay to touch on it, because I think it's for the same reason that you do. Like, I have more than one horse, but my reason for competition is very different from what it used to be. And I actually don't think I was actually in touch with why I did it before. I just did it. And now, like with Zora, like, I love getting dressed up all shiny with her, and she has a different bridle that she wears because it's her shiny show bridle, and I love that feeling of going and making that progress and doing those things. But it's because of that progression, it's because of the training, it's because of those things that then allow me to really enjoy it. And I think you spoke about this before, that sort of feeling of holding your breath while you were doing things, or like slightly disassociating from it. And I got to the point where that's how I felt when I competed, and now it doesn't feel like that so much. I feel very present. And I think maybe this is a bit of a rogue tangent that is more relevant to the competition episode, but it is important to touch base with why we do what we do.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, what we're trying to get to the bottom of here, is with this new horse, with this, you could start tomorrow, by the way. You can have owned your horse for 5 years and you can behave in this way. Why do we do it? What are we gaining from that? What do we want to do with our horse? Is it to feel a feeling or make a progression, or it's for fun, or it's for, what's our why?
Well, you also touched on something in that which I really liked talking about. I talk about it a lot, which is the confidence jar. It's something my coach taught me. It's not really mine, it's hers, and she probably learned it from somebody else. But it's this idea that, like, you have a jar, if you imagine like a jar of pennies, and that's your confidence jar, and you have one and your horse has one too. And particularly, I think, having a young horse, you have a more responsibility perhaps for that horse's confidence jar when they're younger, because they need you a bit more. They're not as self-assured, etc. Although, maybe everyone needs one. And the idea is that, every time you ride and you have a good ride, you put a penny in your jar, and the idea is that that confidence can disappear quite quickly. And if you do things, so if I'd continued to go competing, even though I know that my horse is not comfortable in those environments, I'm just pouring
Well, you just be taking them out every time. Yeah.
Until he's completely at the bottom. And then that's when people are like, I've completely hit my limit. My horse won't do this. And they're stopping at everything. And it's all because you've just gone so far down the confidence jar. And so for me, like, yes, the competing is like a really chance to show off and show where we are. But it's also, for me, a great barometer of, like, where are we? And where are our gaps? And what's he comfortable with and what's he not? And where's the confidence at? And I'm very careful with, like, hacking, etc. Like, if I hack him on his own, I know he finds that more difficult, and so I'm really careful with how much I do it, and then what I do with friends, and how am I building his confidence. Like, it's all quite curated to ensure that our jars stay full, and your coach is also responsible for this. That's why they coach you. But yeah, you're nodding, so you go.
Yeah, the curation is such a valuable thing to say. Like, how do we curate our horse's week or month or year to help them grow and build this confidence? Like, what can we do to build our jars together? Because you have your jar, they have their jar, but then also there's kind of this combined jar where, when you're working together, there's a lovely thing that I often say to people. It's, how do I feel? How does my horse feel? How do we feel together, and how is the environment affecting those other three things? And it's when we are very aware of, like, all of those at the same time that we then can start to make that progression. And going back to the MOT servicing situation, that is like pouring a cup of confidence into your horse's jar. Making sure that your saddle is good, bridle is good, teeth are good, feet are good, all of those things. If you have a hole in one of those, there's going to be pennies falling out of the jar all the time, just every now and then. Every time you ride, the bad saddle It's just pulling some pennies out of the jar. So making sure that we're doing all of these things is so important to keep building that confidence jar in that first year. I mean, this goes beyond the first year, of course it does. It's kind of a metaphor, but I think that's a really lovely, succinct way of saying that.
Well, the curation piece too is like, I'm such a chronic planner, Virgo energy. I love to plan, and that's why I created the diaries, which are currently actually sold out unless you don't own a horse, in which case there are diaries that are designed for people who have lessons and they're available. But what I was going to say is I'm quite careful about how I plan my horse's week. As in, like, I try not to school twice in a row. And actually, someone said this in a perfect way. If you go to the gym, you would never do leg day twice in a row, because that's really difficult, especially if you've been working your muscles properly. And so if you're asking your horse to do really proper flat work in an outline 2 days in a row, that is difficult for them. And I try to never like do flat work twice in a row. I try not to jump more than like once a week, etc. And the other week I had a week where we had like a dressage competition, a lesson, and then a dressage lesson, and they all fell within like days of each other. It was last week. And so this week I have I'm fortunate that sometimes my coach can ride with me, and we have a local farm that's great for cantering. It's just like open fields and it's wonderful. And I was like, oh, this week let's not go in the school, let's just take them cantering, just because he needed that little, I felt like he'd worked so hard in the school and he wanted something a bit different. And it's just jolly, it's just nice, and it's nice to go out in the box, and he always comes back with a bit of a pep in his step, and he was quite fresh actually, so he kept up with my coach's event horse, so I think he was feeling quite well. But like balancing those things of being like, he's worked so hard for me last week in the school, I don't want him to not enjoy that work, I'm going to change it this week and do something else. And it's still coaching, it was just coaching for something else, which was cool.
Yeah.
Huge thanks to the sponsor of this podcast, Premier Performance. Now, Miri and I have talked about how these calming cookies are a great way to just give your horse a little bit of calmer when they need it most. And that has definitely been the case for me and Harley in the last couple of days, as we're beginning to ramp up towards some of the competition early spring, giving Harley that extra bit of confidence when we're going out to new venues, doing things alone for the first time. Keeping his confidence jar really topped up has been really helped by the calming cookies. So if you'd like to try them for yourself, then all you need to do is head to the show notes for all of the information.
And a lovely little discount code to help you on your way. So I've got two things to mention on this. I think curating their week is really important, and and what I generally always try and do with the horses that are with me for training is they always have 2 days off in a row.
Yes, you've talked about this.
There's some studies around that actually this is a really good way of avoiding ulcers in like higher trained, in like more advanced trained horses, basically, because in 2 days it allows their muscles to recover far more than if you just give them 1 day. So there's the piece on their body being recovered better after 2 days, but also their brains are very different, especially when it comes to young horses. And like we said, we'll do an episode all about young horses because we've got so much to say. But the way that a horse's brain works is that if you give them 2 days off in a row, not only do they not have to think about what it is that you're asking of them, but they then get an opportunity for it to kind of sink in, and then they often will then come back feeling very different. So I try and set their week up where we start the week with learning and with check-in, so with groundwork or long lining or maybe lunging, maybe for the older horses some pole work, something from the ground though, generally always, so I can see their bodies, I can assess them like I was saying before, check in, where is that horse at, how have they come back in after their 2 days of rest. And then I would build their week from there, and I would maybe build up to something and then have a rest day. So like day 1, long lining, lunging, groundwork potentially. Day 2, groundwork and riding. Day 3, potentially the older horses would just have a school. Some of the young horses would then maybe have another groundwork or a long line, something like that. And then some hacking. And then maybe another day of one of the things that I feel like they either need to do more of, or that they've done enough of those things, and then we have another easy day. And that works incredibly well because you get this sort of opportunity to actually pay attention to what they need and then work with that throughout the week, and it works incredibly well. You then never have that sort of maybe fresh day where they've had days off, because the first thing that you do is very low expectation. You're checking in with their body. How do they feel? Do they feel fresh? Do they feel flat? Do they look sound? Whatever it might be. You know, I work with a lot of rehab horses that have had complicated things go on in their bodies. So it's like this, that check-in and then work appropriately, I think is a really lovely way of curating that. And you can take that into the whole month. You could take that throughout over a couple of months, and maybe that takes us nicely into talking about the seasons and why that we think it's relevant to talk about seasons with our horses. And I don't mean seasons like one season of this and one season of that, but more like genuinely winter, spring, summer, autumn. What's been your experience with Harley of learning about him throughout a year? Like, what have you noticed about him through the seasons?
Yeah, well, I have the added complication of when he has these growth spurts because he's still quite young, and Irish drafts take a long time to mature. So when I know now, I know what to look for. I didn't in the beginning, but I know what he looks like and how he feels when he's growing, and he often feels a little bit different in his body, and he finds things a bit more difficult. His ability to cope is like...
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, I mean, yes, his arse goes up like a mountain, and he eats like a hungry caterpillar. Like he'll finish his hay because he gets ad lib hay, like he eats from the floor, which I love, but he'll like finish, and whereas before he might like have a little nap before he like has some more, he'll be like at the door like, I'm starving, I haven't been fed in hours, you know, he's so hungry. But his coping and his ability to do difficult things, he's just got such a smaller window for that, like whereas before he's a real workhorse, so he's usually quite kind of like really trying something. But anyway, that's the growing piece, so that happens on top. But I do notice that the change of the seasons, sometimes he's a little more, and they're all a bit like that. We talk about horses being fresh at change of seasons, but I know that you have a different view on this, of like how different it should be. But I do notice sometimes, you know, when we're going from summer to autumn and the wind starts picking up, or you know it starts getting a bit colder, or the grass changes in the spring when you're getting more sugar in the grass, like there's those moments where just energy feels a bit bigger, or their coping feels a bit less. And just being like, one thing that's helped me with those is like, this is nothing to do with you. So like now if I'm out hacking and he's feeling a bit anxious, just reminding myself that like, this is nothing to do with me. It's not like a personal attack. He's not trying to ruin the ride. Not that I thought that before, but you know, and just being like, I'm the mentor in this. Like, I'm fine. I've got you. You're fine. We're okay, you know?
And I think you can do that very comfortably because your management system with him is so solid. And I think that's something to definitely touch on. Like, and we've spoken about this a lot. Livery yards are difficult places because you're not in control.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're not in necessarily 100% control of the way Harley lives his life, but you are offered a circumstance for him that suits him so implicitly that you don't have to worry about that. You know, we spoke about before that person who had someone that their yard owner just texts them at 8 a.m. and says, horses aren't going in the field today.
Yeah,
you're like, well, now I was hoping I was going to go to a show on Saturday, and they're not going to have been out in the field for 48 hours. That is completely completely unacceptable. Essentially, I now can't go to the show potentially because my horse is not going to feel like they are in a place where they can do that in a safe, calm way. And it wouldn't then be fair to ask them to be stood in a stable and then go to a show and have to be a good boy and go between the white boards. You know, it's a very difficult circumstance to be put in. I'm so glad that you're in that position, and that's what we mean about being aware that your horse's circumstance will be directly affecting them. And you know, sometimes, you know, it is what it is. It rains like absolute hell and we can't do anything about it, but it does mean we have to change our expectation.
Yeah.
And if you know that your horse is going to have restricted turnout through the winter, question whether that livery yard is the only option for you and whether you could maybe go somewhere where there is less restriction. But B, think to yourself, potentially through that time, I need to lessen off on the goals. I need to slim down on the expectations because my horse isn't going to be able to offer as much as I would like them to be able to offer, right? And I think
I really like that word, offer. Like, I love that language framing of like, what can they offer? Yeah, it's nice.
And actually, even it's just been a real shift for me, even really recently, because I'm paid to train people's horses, and sometimes that means that there is an expectation of the speed at which that horse is going to shift or change or be broken in or whatever you want to call it, started, backed, whatever. And I have to be so strict with myself and with the owner of, I have to limit expectation or make sure that they understand that I will only be training the horse at the horse's speed. Sorry, I know you want this done, but I can't go faster than that horse wants. I once had somebody tell me that I was asked to be on a like a showcase thing, like a go and do a demonstration.
Oh, right.
And I spoke to the organizer, and they said, that they'd spoken to somebody about the potential of me going on this showcase. And they'd said, this other person had said, "Oh yeah, I know Miri Hackett. She's the one that takes ages to back horses." And I thought to myself,
I don't know why I'm offended by that, because you're probably like, yeah, and
because I am never ever going to be the person that says, yeah, I can fix that in a month, because I have no idea. Yeah, I've got no idea. I've had horses that have come in to be backed, and they've been with me 6 weeks. They're really straightforward. It's lovely. They just trot about. They're very happy. They go through the groundwork process really comfortably. And then there are other horses, 12 weeks, and they're still not there because they've had a bad past experience and something has gone wrong. So it's like, who am I to be able to say, "Oh yes, your expectation, madam, is no problem. I'll make that horse fit into that box"? I can't, and nobody can. And if they are, it's probably because force or fear or something gets sidelined in. There is a sidebar to that, which is, if you are, and I'm not saying all dealers, blah blah blah, but dealers are on a time frame to sell horses, and so quite often they will push a horse, or they will use a tool that maybe you wouldn't use to get that horse looking or appearing a certain way in a video. And so having that expectation when the horse comes to you that you may have to just unpick a little bit of that as you go is also just a thing to be aware. And that if your horse that you're purchasing was ridden by, like you were saying before, ridden by a professional, there will be a certain amount of unravelling that will take place potentially, and things may get more difficult before they get easier, because the system, doing some air quotes, that horse was in was potentially quite consistent and regulated, and it may not have been harsh, it may not have been not kind, but it might have been more than you're used to. So getting an understanding of what that looked like is really important. Ask as many questions as you possibly can. How many days a week has this horse been working? What have you been doing with the horse within that week? You know, just getting a rough idea can really help you to not have these kind of unexpected, "Oh my god, and then he started doing this." And actually it's because once a week the horse was being long lined, and it really liked that consistency. It really liked that I said that twice. Really liked that feeling of process.
You were consistent with your consistent language.
I was. And that means that then, you know, the horse then gets to a point where that has unravelled a little bit, and you need to kind of re-ravel that. And it's that awareness point, isn't it? It's just knowing these things, being aware of them, that is so important. I am so passionate about the disassociation that seems to occur so often with humans and animals. And it's the disassociation that we have with animals because of like various different things that have gone on, where we don't connect with what that being is. Like, what is that being feeling? And I mean being by horse or animal or whatever. What are they feeling? Like, where's that? I'm doing some hand gestures, but do you see? We're like passing. My hands are like passing each other.
Yeah.
Because, and it's being so switched on to what our horses need, listening to them, seeing how they change, that allows us then to help them for what they need.
Yeah. Give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I think the thing is now, because we've had so many conversations about horses being missold, that when something goes wrong with a horse 3 months in, say you're riding on a golf course, whoosh, hit a golf course, your horse shoots off, and that person might then be like, oh my gosh, this is not the horse I bought, what is this behaviour, da-da-da. Maybe they just haven't heard a golf ball before. Like, maybe that's it. It might not be that the horse has been completely missold. I think benefit of the doubt is a biggie. I think it's easy to be like, oh, why would they not have done this before? But, you know, some horses haven't. Sometimes they've never seen an indoor arena or a golf course or a tractor or a blah, 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 blah. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%.
It's like racehorses, when people get on racehorses on mountain blocks. And sometimes they really don't know how to do that because they've never been taught. Like, it's just little things like that, you know?
I watched a video of some people getting on racehorses recently, and they were walking up from, like, a whole stream of people were walking the horses
just don't
up
stop.
to the mounting block. They just don't stop.
Yeah.
The people just jump on and off they
Keep
carry
walking.
on.
Yeah.
And I am a real advocate for horses learning to feel restful at the mounting block. I teach the horses to do that little magic trick where they twizzle. They turn to stand at the block, and they're restful, because that is a huge telltale sign for how the horse is going to feel about the ride. Now, I'm not expecting, you know, if your horse has got in that habit of marching past the mounting block, you know, I don't mean like that means there's something categorically wrong, but it's a really good indicator when you are starting to teach the horse about being restful and slow and all of those things, that if they are then coming to the block, I can be here. What would you like me to do? Oh, you're going to get on and then you're going to fiddle around with your coat. Like, I could literally get on Zora and then eat a 3-course dinner, and she'd be like, okay. Because she's so happy to just hang out in that space, because there's no preconceived idea of like, oh, the person's going to get on and then I'm going to get ridden and da 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 da. And it's like that, again, that awareness point of if you buy this new horse and you go to the mounting block and they're there and they're going, oh, I don't really want this. There's probably some things that you could do to slow down, to make them feel more comfortable, to teach them about that process that will then fill in the blanks, like you were saying, Rhi, to then help you build that partnership as you go forward.
Gorgeous. I love it.
I love that. So we always ask you guys to ask us questions, whether that be about the topic or about something completely different. And we received a really cool message this week. Hi Miri, I just wanted to say thank you for this Equestrian Life podcasts. I really appreciate the content and the topics you all are touching on, in particular the episodes on yard conflicts, confidence and being self-employed. Long story short, I'm buying a horse farm property where I currently board my gelding. That is a really cool thing to do. Just go and buy your livery yard. What a cool, badass thing to do. The owner managed it as a backyard barn, and I'm hoping to turn it into a small riding facility, navigating LLC establishment, drafting, boarding contracts, da-da-da-da. All quite daunting, albeit exciting. I'm only 28 and I find I've got quite a bad case of imposter syndrome when it comes to being a barn manager, caring for others' horses, despite having been highly involved with horses my whole life. The podcasts have really inspired me and helped me feel a little bit less isolated. I don't know what I'm doing, Island. And then she goes on to ask, perhaps you could touch on the idea of imposter syndrome in one of your future podcasts, or perhaps something around evolving confidence when it comes to horse care. Well, I feel like we've done a good job of that today. So this question ties in so fantastically well.
What a great question.
And horse health, stable management. I always worry if I'll be able to spot health emergencies early enough, know how to handle emergencies, know how to handle gnarly people as a non-confrontational, peacekeeping human. I also worry about older boarders taking me, my barn policies and stable care seriously, since I'm young and I'm a woman. I feel a lot of people struggle with this in our industry, and I'd love to know your thoughts. Thanks to you and Rhiannon for being a constant shining light in the equine world. Oh, little cry. Well,
I mean, our community's so badass.
Oh,
like,
I love it. We've always said that, haven't we? Both of us. Like, our DMs are like the coolest group chat. Like
100%. Just very clever, curious, great people.
You know, we could actually make a group chat on
I did actually
Instagram.
think about that. But then I was like, people find that super overwhelming. Well, why don't you tell us? Because we would love to. I think this could be fun, especially if people imagine someone's like, guys, I'm having this problem. Like, can I get some advice? And then people are able to chip in. Is that overwhelming or is that good? I don't know. You tell us.
That could be nice. I think if it was well enough curated, you know, like there was no sort of wild advice going on in there. But I think for this kind of conversation, because I think actually just feeling alone in these kind of things is really a big part of it. And actually, this lovely person will have probably... Well, this question will probably resonate with a lot of people, potentially. And I think it's a really interesting topic, because this imposter syndrome, buying a new horse, starting a new job, moving to a new yard is a really difficult space to navigate. Now, Rhi, you go first. What would you, if this lovely person had just was messaging you privately, what advice would you give?
So I've suffered with imposter syndrome in my own career, and actually it's come up a lot in my career with people, because it's quite common in a corporate space, especially for women. And as you were speaking, or as I was listening to your message, there were two things that came up for me. One of them is setting up your structures and your frameworks for your business, and Miri will be able to touch on this, but things that, one, they're going to be a great moment for you to be like, I have the knowledge, I'm confident in that knowledge. But secondly, they're going to really help when people start to push your boundaries, or you feel like someone's doing something you're not comfortable with. You already have your guardrails, you have your frameworks. This is my livery policy, this is my pricing, blah, blah, blah. So it's sort of detached from you and your emotion, and it's the business. So that's one thing that I think is really good. On the imposter syndrome side, something that has really helped me, and something I worked through with my career coach, was removing yourself from this pool of comparison. And what I mean by that is, rather than comparing yourself to your peers, just think about yourself as the same way that you might with dressage, right? Yes, it's great to get a ribbon, but we're not really there to compete with others. We're there to compete with our previous score, if that makes sense. And so if you consider yourself as a sort of one of one, I've talked about this on the podcast before, what is it that you offer? What is it that you're really good at? Where are you like really strong, and what are people going to come to you for? Removing yourself from that comparison just takes you out of the imposter syndrome space, because you're just doing you, and you're being the best that you can be. And you can't get being yourself wrong. I said this on my Instagram the other day. If you're being authentically yourself and you're confident in that and you're not hurting anybody, you literally can't get it wrong. And so I think, put yourself in a one-of-one space and remove yourself from the category of others. Yeah.
Mic drop. That was
Here
really
all week.
Good.
Thanks, mate.
Here every week.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with everything that you just said. And I think, yes, having paperwork that gets in the way of this stuff is really important. Have yourself very well covered. Have very good insurance. You know, horses hurt themselves, and it is not your job to be... of course, you have a duty of care with those animals, but like, if a horse gets a cut in the field, they get a cut in the field, and that is the black and the white of it. And there's nothing that you were meant to do differently, as long as you are providing a safe, properly managed environment. You can go to sleep at night knowing that you're doing the best you possibly can. And you know, horses have a brain the size of a small apple, and that is controlling 700 kilos sometimes, and that is... You can't be totally responsible for every little thing that happens, but making sure that, like you say, you have policies in place, you have documents, you have things that people receive that outlines all of those things that you are going to be offering, and then making sure that your price reflects what service you're going to be offering. And you sound like a very like-minded person to us, and it sounds like you are a non-confrontational peacekeeping human, and that is a lovely person to be, to create a space for horses and people to exist in. You've just got to make sure that peace is your peace is not kept, you don't let people kind of impose on your peace, and that you are the person that backs down in those difficult situations potentially. Like, be confident in knowing that you do know what you're talking about. And I do think that this does come just from experience and time, and give yourself grace that there'll be difficult situations early on that you think, I didn't quite deal with that how I would have liked to. Maybe I said, okay, sorry, when you maybe shouldn't have said okay and sorry. But it will just come with time, and giving yourself that space to just let it happen is so important. And that's just like a life lesson, right? No one is going to expect this to be perfect straight away, and you will learn and you will fail and you will have difficult days and great days, but having some structure in place and having openness in place is going to be a really important thing. You know, discuss that with the people who have been there for longer and say, look, I'm navigating this for the first time, and I hope that you can be a human being with me while I'm being a human being with you. And that's the best we can do sometimes.
And you know what? One thing I can tell you for fact, we don't even know you, but I can tell you for fact, your people will never be thinking about your age or your gender. Not all people, but your people. They will never think like that. I promise you. Mm-hmm. That's all you need to know.
Yeah. And the other people will just walk their way out of your life.
Bye.
And on that note, see you next week. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Whoosh.
Imagine extra outro music starts. That was a good one. That was a nice question.
Enjoyed that.
If ever you want to send us a longer question, or you can either send us an Instagram DM like this lovely person has, or you can send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Send us a voice note, any of the above.
Yeah. Coming up for the rest of the season, so we're going to have a 10-episode first season, and then we'll take a little season break, come back for season 2. We've got rider fitness, which I am super excited to discuss, young horses, and a couple of other things. So it's going to be a good end to the season. We're really excited to share it with you.
I just wanted to mention here, if you are a brand and you are listening to our podcast and you would like to be part of our podcast as a sponsor, then please do also drop us an email. Much like we talked about Westgate today, we would love to help.
Yeah, love to hear from you.
That was a good plug.
Yeah, great plug.
Well, that concludes episode 6 of This Equestrian Life. I am loving this so much, Rhi. I think this has been a really cool episode to discuss, and I hope a lot of value will be taken for people. See you next week, same time?
Yeah, same time next week. See you then, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye. We still haven't nailed the end, have we?
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Amy's going to leave this in if she's feeling witchy. All right.
Oh, God. See you guys next week. Goodbye.
Goodbye.